Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's Genius Material webinar. We're going to have a look at the online revision calendar. I'm going to show you around the calendar and make sure that you're completely familiar with it so that you can begin to use it and get the benefit of it straight away. Now, just putting it into context, you'll recall that there are 3 keys to learning. The first key is that you've got to spend enough time with the information in the first place to let it sink into your brain. The second key is you've got to make revision notes in a form that your brain likes. And the third key is you need to revisit that revision in a particular way to keep it fresh in your mind so that you can recall it, so that it's there for you when you need it. Now, this calendar helps you with the third part, because if you also remember, it gets very, very clumsy and difficult as you keep your eye on the different chunks that you're learning. Because you remember we said that you can learn anything if you divide it up into small enough chunks. And we all know you've got a lot to learn in your manuals. And the way to tackle that is to divide up what you've got into chunks and smaller chunks. So that one set of revision, what I would call a revision chunk, is just one section with, seven or so things to remember about that particular chunk. If you also recall, we were talking about putting 7 or fewer bits of information on any one sheet of paper that you're drawing notes on. So you really are going to end up with lots and lots of chunks, and many chunks per subject. Every time you sit down to learn a new chunk, it's necessary to make a note of the date that you did that, and then keep a diary or a calendar letting you know when to come back and revisit it. Remember, the pattern there is you've got to come back to it within 24 hours and preferably after you've slept on it. Otherwise, you're really getting off to a very bad start. If you do have a look at it again after you've slept on it and you remember everything you intended to remember, you've got off to a much better start. The implication then is that you are likely to remember that, but you do have to go back to it again a week later. So you don't have to keep going back to it every day. In fact, you wouldn't have time if you were ever going to learn anything new. But you do need to go back to that particular chunk a week later. All being well, let's say that when you go back to it, you still remember everything that you intended to remember for that chunk. You can then come back to it a month later. And then if you keep coming back to it monthly until the exam, you're made. That's it, all sorted. And you need to do that for every single chunk that you learn. So if you've learned a couple of chunks today, you need to come back to them within 24 hours. If you remember the information on both those chunks tomorrow, you can come back to it again a week later. However, if you come back to them a week later and you didn't remember everything in one of those chunks, you need to start again with the pattern. And that's how this thing becomes very, very unwieldy before long. Because in the meantime, it's not just those 2 chunks that you've ever learnt. In the meantime, you've learnt other chunks too. And you're having to keep an eye on them in the revision sequence. So it does, in a very short amount of time, it becomes very unwieldy, very onerous. But the problem is, if you don't organise yourself that way, if you really don't go back to each chunk in the right time, 24 hours later, a week later, and monthly, then you are setting yourself up for failure. And most people don't know this, which is why most people find that no matter how hard they revise, they don't remember anything. So this is a very, very important key to learning. The online revision calendar, the reason that I've had it made for us is because it takes the pain out of all that organising. Because if you don't organise yourself that way, you're setting yourself up to forget 80% of what you've learnt, and within a couple of weeks. You're certainly not going to remember it in time for the exam. So the online revision calendar takes care of the admin, the organisation of that. Of course, you still have to do the bloomin' work. There's no getting out of that. But at least it will tap you on the shoulder, metaphorically speaking, and say, "Oi, you've got some revision to do today. Go and revisit the following bits of information. Go and revisit the following chunks." And I'm going to show you today how the calendar will do that for you. Because all you have to do is then concentrate on your revision in the first instance and your revisiting of those chunks later on. The system will tell you when to do that and which chunk to do. So you will find the calendar once you've logged in and you have access to all these tabs, the second row of tabs on the website. The calendar is the last button. When you click on that calendar tab, this is what you will see. This is what you'll have access to. So you can see that today's date is highlighted. And the reason for that is it's telling you, hey, there's something you need to do today. So today is the 24th. If you recall, in last week's webinar on the 17th, we entered into the system a chunk of revision on the 16th, and last Friday we went to have a look at it and indeed revisited it, and then marked in the system, yep, good, I know all of that, I'm on track, and we gave the system a tick. As a consequence of that, the system is still showing up that we've got to revisit that again today. Does that make sense? So we first learnt it. The first key to learning is spending enough time with the information in the first place. We did that on Thursday. We entered it into the calendar, and it told us last week by highlighting that we had to look at it again on that Friday, which we did, and we ticked to say, yep, all gone well. Consequently, it's now showing up that we've got to do it a week later. And if I click through, if you keep your eye on the 24th of the next month, there we are. It's there, showing up that I've got to revisit it again then. Now we've got one here on the 1st, and that will be because, if I could just go back a month, Friday the 1st is also highlighted, as you'll see, and that will be because the calendar is nudging me to revisit something that I would have inputted in the calendar previously. Okay, so let's add a revision. Let's say that today I have done some revision. Let's say that I've been looking at OEIC, and let's say that I'm going to put that into the system to let the system know that I've done that today. So you click on Add New Revision. Revision title, OEIC. Here in Revision Details, it would be interesting for me to know how you use this. We've got it there so that you can type in, if you want, the test question that you've devised for yourself. And it might be that you find other uses for it too. There might be notes that you want to put in there. So do let me know how you get to use this. But I wanted to put that there in case you wanted to put your test question there. So, OEIC. Now, the category that I've assigned to it, because remember you need to keep tabs on your revision. I've shown you how to organise your revision so that on each sheet that you write on, your revision notes, you've got on it the context for those particular notes. If you're dividing a subject up into lots of different chunks, it's really important then when you come to look at those notes later on, you know exactly which section that chunk belongs to. So in this particular instance, OEIC, I have categorized it in this particular instance, the OEIC, I've categorized it as investment. So I come to assign category and I come down here and I need to give it investment. And there it is. Okay, so I'll capture that. And it's defaulted to today's revision date, which is just great. That's just what I need. And I need to put in the exam date, when I will be taking the exam for which this information will be relevant. Now it's very, very important to put the exam date in because it acts as a stop for the sequence. Because what's going to happen is, once we've clicked Add Revision, the system is going to add this revision title, OEIC, onto your calendar so that you can see at a glance when you've got to go back and revisit it, and then it will keep reminding you that that's what you've got to do. But you don't want it to do that for the rest of your life. So you have to tell it when to stop, and the logical time to do that is when you take the exam. So if you click on here, very, very quickly, you can pick up the date of the exam. I'm saying that my exam is on September the 9th. In it goes. Add revision. You have successfully set up the revision. Okay, so that chunk is now in there. Let's have a look at the calendar again now. Remember, the calendar was telling us that we already have some revisiting to do today. Now it's added in the fact that because we've done a new chunk today, we've got some revisiting to do tomorrow. If you click through to that date, tomorrow's date, you will see that it's going to remind us. There we go. It's going to remind us to look at this title in that category, which is indeed the chunk that I've learnt today, and input it into the system. Okay, so I'll have to come back to that tomorrow. And there it is on the calendar to remind me. Okay, great. Now, let's have a look at the overview. Because this is where you will see all the revisions, all the revision chunks that you've done. And you'll see where they are in their sequence, their learning sequence. And you will also see that OEIC, I have just done the first part. In fact, I've just done day 1. So that makes sense. Tomorrow, when I come back to it, hopefully I'll remember everything I intended to remember. I'll give myself a tick, and it will appear that I've now, let me show you, completed day 2. Fingers crossed then that I remember tomorrow what I intended to remember from the revision I've done today. On many of the pages, on many other views, you will see this group of buttons. If you hover over each, it'll tell you exactly what each is for. When you tick something, it means that you've just done your revision, you've just done your revisiting, and you've successfully remembered everything you meant to remember. You click that, and it just keeps you on the same sequence that it devised for you in the first place. In other words, have a look at it tomorrow, a week later, and then monthly. The next button is a reset button. So let's say you come back to it, but unfortunately you didn't remember everything that you intended to remember. That means you have to look at the other keys to learning. So the first key is spending enough time with the information in the first place. Maybe you were in a hurry, maybe you didn't really spend enough time letting that information sink in. Or maybe the second key, you didn't actually make really great notes for your brain. So that maybe they were okay, but just not quite good enough for your brain to make any sense of them the next day. So in any event, you now have to go back to that chunk of revision because you don't know it. You either know it or you don't know it. If you can't remember everything on that sheet, you really don't know it. Don't fool yourself. Make sure that you go back to it and spend some more time with it, and perhaps even highlight the notes. We've talked about how to do that in previous webinars. It's in your ebook and it's in the training videos too. But in that case, you need to reset the learning sequence, because when you've spent some time with it today, you then need to go back to it tomorrow, and then a week tomorrow, and then monthly. So in other words, today becomes the first day of the new sequence. It's like starting again. It will be easier this time, of course, because you've learnt most of it already. It's only probably one small bit that you need to just make sure you remember. but you do need to go back to it within another 24 hours. So that's where you would reset if you didn't remember everything that you intended to when you go back to your revision chunk. If you've made a mistake anywhere along the line and you want to delete your entry, that's where to do it. And you will get a warning pop up asking you, are you sure you want to delete this? But nevertheless, you want to be sure that you don't press that unless you really mean to. Okay, so there's all the things that I've entered into the system already, all the different chunks. You see where I've got the same title but a different number, it's because even that section of my revision I wanted to divide up into even smaller chunks. But I didn't want to call them completely different names. It made a lot of sense for me to call them the same thing, because they were all part and parcel of that same part of revision I was trying to learn. So I've just labelled them with 1s, 2s, 3s. Here we go again, look, financing activities 1. So obviously that fell into more than one part as well. So it's whatever you think is the best thing for you to call it, because it's your revision, it's your organisation. You just need to give it a name so you know which chunk you're referring to, and so that when you go to find that revision sheet to test yourself, you know which one you're looking for, where to find it in your ring binder. Okie dokie. So let's now just have a quick look at the calendar, because do you remember before we started we noticed that it was nudging me, here we are, it's nudging me that I've got a revision to do, I've got to revisit something that I've learnt. So all I do then is just click on it, click on today's date to go and find out exactly what it is that I've got to do. Ah, look, financial planning priorities, that's what I called it, and it's a week later. So I must have done days 1 and 24 hours later, day 2, and now it's reminding me to have another go a week later. So let's say then that I go test myself. This is where I might choose to have a look at my question on the calendar itself, as I was showing you earlier on. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to my ring binder. I'm going to find the page that's labelled Financial Planning Priorities. And it's already in my ring binder, the question side up, rather than my notes, the question side up. I ask myself the question I've devised to test myself on the information on the other side. I've answered my question out loud, drawing in the air, seeing it in my mind's eye. And yep, I turn the page over, double check that I've said out loud everything that's on the other side of the sheet, and sure enough I've remembered everything I intended to remember. Brilliant. All I need to do then is come over here and tick. Mark current stage finished. Are you sure you want to mark it finished? That's right, I've successfully completed the 1 week stage of that particular chunk. Current revision stage has been successfully completed. Now, if you look at the overview, ta-da! Here it is. I've now got 3 ticks because financial planning priorities, I've now accomplished week 1. And so it's going to remind me in a month's time to go back to it. Now that was already in the system. Do you remember we looked at the calendar for next month and it was there on the 24th, it was already there. So by ticking it to say, yeah, I've remembered it all, I'm on track, it's leaving that date in place for me. If I'd had to reset it, it would have changed that date and given me a new sequence starting from today. But fortunately I'm on track, so all is well. Great. Now, let's go back to add new revisions. Let's say that yesterday I had a bit of time. I'd arrived early for a meeting and I had a bit of time, so I decided to have a go at some revision. But because I had such a hectic day yesterday, I didn't actually enter the details into my revision calendar, my online calendar. So let's add yesterday's revision into the system as though it was yesterday. So the revision title is liquidity ratio. And because I've been playing with it, you can see that it's already there. So I'm just going to grab that. Liquidity ratio. I can use this space here to write the question I've got to test myself if I want, but I need to assign the category. Now for me, liquidity ratio is equations. Oops, and I haven't got equations in there already, so I'm going to have to put that category in there. Let's add a new category. Here are the categories I've got in here already. Let's say that I've been doing some equations lately, some ratios. So I want to add a category called equations. So here we go. And it was already coming up because I've been playing with it. Let's give it a nice jazzy colour, shall we? What colour should we give it? What have I got so far? Let's go for a bright green. And I can either click on OK there or just go straight to the Add button. There it is, equations, and that nice bright colour. Because yesterday I did some revision, but I didn't get a chance to put it into my online revision calendar. So I'm going to add a new revision today, but tell the system that day 1 was yesterday. So the revision title is liquidity ratio. There we go. Because I've been playing with it, it's already there. You can put the question you've got to test yourself in there if you want to. The category is equations, which is why we've just put that in there. So I grab equations. The revision date is not today, it was yesterday. So I can either just change it here or click on the calendar. But I want yesterday's date to go in there. And the exam date, again, I'm going to tell it it's September the 9th for the sake of the argument. And we add the revision. Successfully set up the revision. Let's have a look at the calendar. Because if I've successfully set it up, it would be telling me that today I've got to revise it. I've got to revisit it. Do you remember? If yesterday was day 1, then today is day 2, and I had better revisit it within 24 hours and preferably after I've slept on it. Right, well, I've slept on it. So here I am then. Have a look at Friday to see what it is that I've got to revisit today. And there it is. Do you remember that it was telling me before I had some revisiting to do today, but because I've done it and I ticked it to say, hooray, I've done it, it's moved on to the next part of the sequence. It's not going to tell me again to have another go at it. So that's disappeared from that view. But liquidity ratio is there because I need to have a look at that today. Let's say that I go back to that today and, oh, there's one small bit that I didn't remember that I really need to remember, because actually I'm going to do a good job on my exams and I'm going to remember everything that I've set out to remember, not just some of it, all of it. So there's one bit that I didn't recall today. So I go back to my notes, I spend more time with the information, and I change my notes in some way to make it even more brain friendly, and of course friendly to my brain, not somebody else's, something that's going to work for me. So I have another go at it, maybe highlighting it, maybe ultimately scrapping the notes I made yesterday and setting them out in a completely different way today. Hopefully I won't have to go to that much trouble, maybe just taking a highlighter and underlining the bit that I forgot today, or doing something like that, drawing a picture around it, or something to draw my brain's attention to that particular bit of information, so that when I come back to it, I remember it. So let's say then that we've had to reset today. So today I've had a go at this, my first revisit, day 2. I failed to remember everything. I'm resetting it. If that's the case, it should make today the 24th, day 1, and then it should remind me tomorrow, the 25th, to have another look at it. In other words, within 24 hours, in other words, day 2. Revision sequence has successfully been reset. Okay, so let's go and have a look at the Genius calendar now. It's telling me I've got something to revise tomorrow, but we knew that already because I've already got something to revise tomorrow. Let's have a look and see what it's telling me. Ah, there we are. This is what we already had to revise tomorrow because I've done that work today. And this is what I've got to do as well tomorrow because we've had to reset the sequence starting with today. Okay, so it's really very, very simple and very, very effective. All you've got to do, once you've inputted into the system the chunk that you've learnt for the first time, all you have to do then is just keep your eye on the calendar. When there's a blue date, it means you've got to go and do some revisiting, and if you want to find out what, you just click on it and it will tell you exactly what you've got to revisit. You see, all that organisation we talked about at the beginning has gone now. It's all done for you. Good. Okay. Let's have a look at the overview. And let's look for liquidity ratio. Because it's telling me that I have just completed day 1. It's not telling me that I did it yesterday successfully and today successfully because I jolly well didn't. It's reset the system so that it's now beginning with today at day 1. Hopefully I'll come back to it tomorrow and I'll be able to give myself another tick and move on the sequence. Okie doke. Okie doke. So, let me show you how, let's have a quick look at the My Revision page. This again is another view of all the revision chunks that you've put into your system. And there they are. Again, you've got these buttons. Tick to say that you've just done the correct revision and you've done it correctly. Reset, oops, you've done the correct revision but you haven't successfully completed it, so you're going to reset it to begin again today with day 1, and the cross for the delete should you need to do that. This is an edit button, so if you needed to edit this in any way, for example, supposing I decide, oh, you know what, this chunk's too big, I need to divide it into 2 chunks, I might then give it a new name. So I can edit it that way if I wanted to. Or I might change the question that I want to put in here to test myself. Or it might turn out that for some of the chunks, actually I want to change the end date because I've got a couple of exams going on at the same time and I had the option of moving one of the exams further away to give myself a bit more space, and I've opted to do that, and I can then change the exam date. So there are all sorts of things you might need to do to edit it, and that's where you do that. Let me show you now the sync calendars aspect of this. Let me click on there and show you this view. Now, this might be very useful for many of you. Some of you may choose not to do it. Some of you may choose to use the calendar online. If you click on the reminder, it will give you some links to go straight to the overview or straight to the calendar, straight to see what revision you've got for the day, that's a useful one, or straight to the My Revision view. So if I wanted to do any of those, I would actually, with my iCal, have to copy and paste. But of course, it'll be much quicker on the other 2 calendars, and we're stuck with that. There's nothing we can do about that. That's just the way that those particular programs work. Remember that in the training part of the website, we now have how to use the online revision calendar, a video number 2 in the training section. Also in the webinars section, we've got each week's webinar recorded, and up here the last week's webinar was also introducing you to the online revision calendar, so there's some information there for you as well. Remember to have a look at previous webinars if you've missed them. You might find them extremely useful. There's some stuff there about mapping. That's one really useful way of remembering some notes. Memory pegs is another useful way that people use. I'm talking about mind maps there and there. note-taking in such a way that your brain really understands what's on the page. It's brain-friendly. How to devise a test question for yourself, and so on. Lots of stuff there that would be really useful to you. Make sure you have a look. See if there's anything that you think would be useful. Okay, so there's lots and lots of stuff there, so make sure that you have a look at that and see what you need to catch up with. Also over here in the blog section of the website, every Friday a new blog goes up. Now I'd like to encourage you to leave comments for me. Sometimes it's some interesting information that's not directly relevant to your revision. Sometimes it's stuff that would be directly relevant to your revision, something that would be very useful for you to know. Is it a good idea to cram? You might have an idea already, but read the article, you might find out a little bit more about it. How to get good exam results? Well, that article might give you some ideas for that. Techniques for improved memory. So there are all sorts of things here. Did you know that science shows us that you get better grades if you're chewing gum? So there are some fun things in there as well. Okay, eat less, remember more. Get better grades. How to ace your exams by spending less time revising. How to send your brain to sleep. Well, I hope by reading that you would do the opposite and make sure you jolly well didn't send your brain to sleep. So there are loads of fun articles there, some of which you'll find extremely useful, some of them are just interesting and a quick 2 or 3 minute diversion. Okie dokie. So that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar and see you next week. Have a good week. Bye bye.